Now check out this flick about the dome. Eric told me about it. I watched it last night. I loved it. You're going to love it. You remember it. Just the history of Virginia Beach. You'll see all these pictures. You'll see these people that, a lot of names you're going to recognize and everything, and see people, all the bands that played there. I mean, everybody imaginable. And Gene Loving had a great story about how he had signed the Beatles to play there in May 1964, but before they hit it real big, when they were on Swan Records, which She Loves You, in the summertime of 1963, which didn't go over. But he figured, well, they'll have another record, and maybe they'll be pretty big, so we'll sign these guys up. But then Brian Epstein says, no, we're too big for the dome, I guess. We'll be talking about that with Paul Unger in just a few right here on News Talk 790 WNIS. Now, there are many ways you could watch this movie. That Was Our Room. I suggest you do. If you're from here or you've been living here since 1976, as I have, you'll really, really enjoy it. And if you just got here, you still will enjoy it because you'll know more about the area you lived in and how we got to be who we are. So let's welcome the man who made it all happen, the man himself, Mr. Paul Unger, director of the Virginia Beach Dome documentary.
Hey, how are you, Tony?
Paul, I am well, and how are you?
Doing great. Just here sipping my coffee and getting ready. And I'm so glad you and Eric Warden liked the movie.
Oh, yes. I didn't know about it until Eric came over and told me, and he said, you're going to love this, because he knew that Gene Loving and I knew each other from many years ago when I worked for him. Now, tell me a little about you. Who is Paul Unger? Where are you from?
Oh, who's Paul Unger? Well, I originally came here to Hampton Roads or Tidewater in 2007. I grew up in Detroit, Michigan, and basically I was I did not go to film school or anything like that. I just went to what I call the Unger University of Learning and just learned editing myself in film. But like I said, ever since I got here, I always really embraced the area, and it was really nice. So I decided to stay, and one thing led to another.
Now, you've had other projects that have to do with music. Tell us about that.
Oh, correct. About 11 years ago in 2011, I worked with my friends Andrea Rizzo and Deborah Persons, making a film called Hardcore Norfolk about the music scene in the past 60 years here in Norfolk overall, and also as well as the other 7 cities. So, and that was really nice. But moving on, I mean, I more or less that was 11 years ago, I was really hungry for something new, moving on. So, it's just like in Barry, thanks for giving that plug to him earlier. Barry Friedman said, Paul, this is about 10, 12 years ago. He's like, Jimi Hendrix played here. You know that, right? And I was like, what? Here? Where? And ever since he mentioned the dome, it was just this ongoing interest to figure out what happened here and a lot of things. And so that's how that movie got started, more or less. I was just sort of reporting for hardcorenorfolk.com a story about the Hendrix shows that took place at the Dome in Virginia Beach in 1968. And that at first fell by the wayside. And I grew more and more interested in the Virginia Beach Dome as time went. That was since 2019. And then the pandemic came along. And then I realized, I was like, well, I've got all this time on my hands, I might as well just approach. The Dome kind of took on its own life as the character of this, if only those walls could talk. I never saw the Dome with my own eyes. But I wanted to see it through the people that were there, through their eyes, and tell the story. And really, more or less, during the film, gather whatever I could about the area, particularly for Virginia Beach, as it was changing as time went.
Yeah.
And so it was a really lot of research, and sometimes I'd be editing this film, and I look at the ceiling, I'm like, am I ever going to finish this, And one day I remember about 3 months ago, my last edit, one that I felt was good enough for this, came up, and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's done. you finished it. And I immediately called up one of the co-producers, Brian Dietrich, and said, it's done, man. It's done, I mean, it needs a little polishing, but we could, it's ready. And it was a really nice experience.
One of the things that I really enjoyed was the history of Virginia Beach and seeing it. The first time I was here, not going back to the 40s or 50s, but it was 1969. And I went to Virginia Beach, and I remember thinking, because I was used to Atlantic City and Jones Beach and those beaches up north where I grew up. And so I thought, man, this is great. Like, it's so quiet. There's not really anything here, because back compared to there, I mean, it was jumping and there was a lot of people and everything, and there were venues and there was all kinds of music and everything. But I was compared to Atlantic City, and I thought, this is really great. But then one of the things I liked so much about your documentary, it showed how rapidly it grew and why it grew. And I liked also the cultural changes when Mr. Gene Loving, who I worked for back at WQRK many years ago, when Gene Loving was talking about how things changed and they couldn't have concerts at night or shows at night because back in the 60s, next day is a school day, the kids can't go. So I really enjoyed that. But one of the things that I got to say, Paul, and I guess it was, hey, and give a shout out, put it up there, Barry at Birdland and his address and everything. Let's give Barry a good plug. Well, let's give Barry a good plug. And you must have got that memorabilia. Did you get it all from Barry and Loving? Where'd you get all that stuff from?
Oh, that's a good point. Some of it came from doing research at the library, Virginia Beach Central Library. Some of it came from Courtney Dyer, who actually worked at the Dome for many years and moved on to the Pavilion as well. And they just would lay these news articles out and pictures, and a lot came from also. I was very privileged to have a good friend of mine, Bill Bradshaw, who was a stagehand at the Dome from 1967 till when it closed in 1993. And he would do his job, and then all of a sudden the performer would be on the stage, and I suppose he just picked up the camera for 5 minutes, take pictures of the band, put it down, and go back to work, And I said, Bill, would you open up? And he had a lot of pictures and negatives that had not been ever released or seen before. And I was very privileged when he opened up his archive to the movie, and I was really lucky and very grateful. So, but as you were saying about Gene Loving, one thing that I was really surprised by was prior to the Beatles, as he's explaining in the movie, he goes, the singers would just come up, sing their number one hit, and a local band would play behind them. I'm like, wait a minute, a local band would just play the song? Yeah, there was no rehearsal or anything. And then the Beatles come out, and obviously that just brings this onslaught of garage rock bands, what have you, that just take over the United States. And one thing leads to another. Everybody wanted to see the band instead of just the singer. And it was pretty remarkable how things did change especially during the 60s, of course. But I wanted to. So I did use promotional vacation promotional videos or old clips from back then to just give the viewer an idea of what Virginia Beach or overall the area looked like, and attitudes and concerns of the city council and whatnot. So as time went on, and the building of the Norfolk Scope and the Hampton Coliseum during the early 70s really had an impact on the overall revenue generated at the Dome. It was becoming, in its heyday, it was great. But as the 70s moved on, it was foreseeable that it was becoming used less for rock concerts or concerts overall, and more for just conventional business for a civic center.
One of the things that is really interesting that I'd like you to address is the architecture, the geodesic dome, and who was the architect, because that's incredible in itself. Take it away.
Absolutely. Buckminster Fuller. The great genius of architecture and literature, and this is literature, but philosophy. And I thought it was so important to mention him. Technically, technically, Virginia Beach was the first, this dome structure was the very first geodesic dome. He would do it for the government, but it was the first convention center built from his idea of a geodesic dome, and in 1957, and it was the first of its kind ever, and it cost the city back in 1957 only $650,000, and they put it up in with I think 30 hours with a 21-man crew. And that was it. There was the dome for the next, I believe, 38 years, So it was quite great, But Buckminster Fuller believed in the philosophy, as you see in the movie, of doing more with less and less until you can do everything with nothing. And I was just like, it's kind of got this sort of... when I think of that, I think of like Henry Ford with the assembly line, eventually building this empire of producing everything with something that you have that more or less you can produce a lot, with once it's established, That to me is kind of like the philosophy of overall doing something with nothing,
Hey, one of the stories that you had that I really liked was when the Rolling Stones played there, and you had some great pictures in the documentary. We're talking to Paul Unger, and he's the director of the Virginia Beach Dome documentary. It's called That Was Our Room, The Life and Times of the Dome. The film's available on the video platform Vimeo, and also you can go to the WNIS Facebook page, and you can see it right there. But I did, now also you talked to Bill Reed, you talked to all kinds of people, all kinds of groups played there. But when the Rolling Stones played there, I guess the authorities were afraid that there was going to be some problems, and so they had a very huge police presence, and Keith Richards said, if we don't get these cops out of here, there's no second show. Was there a second show?
There was indeed a second show, and Tom, I believe Gorney attended that second show as it's like there. But what happened was there was a riot about 8 days before the July 4th, 1966 Stone show, and it made headlines, national news. Well, the sheriff or whoever in Virginia Beach said, not on my turf, that we will not allow that to happen. And they were almost threatening to cancel the Stones from playing here at that 1966 show at the Dome.
I don't think this came up. I don't think this came up in the documentary at all. When was it integrated or was it segregated? And when did that change?
It was integrated, but a large majority of the kids that were there, I was told, were white kids for the most part. The real change happened when, as far as that goes, the segregation to desegregation or integrating, was at the Norfolk Arena in 59 with the once the Norfolk 17, who were integrated in our public schools here, consisting of like Granby and Morey. Once that happened and made national news, I was trying to think of it. Sam Cooke called the manager of the Norfolk Arena and said, I hear that this is a segregated concert that's going on, and I'm not going to allow it, or there'll be a rope between separating the black and white kids. He said, I'm not coming, and they gave in, and that more or less opened the floodgates to this just shouldn't be permitted anymore. Overall they caved in, thank goodness, and so that sort of the rope came down, and more or less concerts were integrated after that point, the summer of 1959, I believe. So it was Sam Cooke demanding, no rope.
Great Sam Cooke, the great Sam. How cool is that? Now, one of the things, I had been to the Dome many times, and I've seen The Who when I was a kid, And they were so loud, I cannot imagine, as loud as they were, playing in that room. I cannot imagine that anybody left there and still had their hearing intact. Healthy Hearing Now, 757-431-1991 if you were at that concert. Or Jimi Hendrix. And I like the story that Loving told about how the music was changing. And these kids were coming in and they were asking for records that he didn't have because they were listening to the alternative music on, or maybe getting some fanzines or something. And he said, hey, we're not playing this stuff. And the kids are asking for it. I thought that was interesting. Like it's changing from the top 40 and the pop, and then all of a sudden it's Jimi Hendrix. Whoa.
Yes. Jimmy, unfortunately, he had to tour to get his name out. As much as RU Experience was released earlier in '67, but he was not. Ed Sullivan did not permit him on his show. He just thought, this is way too wild. I can't have this on the show. Even Paul McCartney said, some people don't need it. We had it. We leveraged it and used it and built our popularity and fame. But Jimmy was not allowed on the, you couldn't see him on TV in early 67, mid 1960, or excuse me, mid 1968, summer of. And it took him a while. He had to do a lot of touring, and he came to the Dome twice, in April 4th, 1968, and August 21st, 1968. He returned, and boy, to me, is one of the most phenomenal, greatest shows, that August 21st show, where he ended with Voodoo Child and Slight Return, and then just broke, the guitar to pieces. And I can't imagine what it was like. It must have been wonderful.
I also like the story when the Who was playing, and one of the people you were talking to says, yeah, Hand came out from behind Pete Towns's amp and gave him some cheap guitar so he could bust it up, and took his real nice guitar. I didn't know that. I thought that was pretty cool too. Now, if you had to give us one story that really stuck with you, or one story that really impressed you, that whenever you're talking about this with your friends, that always comes up, that you lay on them, which story is it?
Oh gosh. Wow, there's so many to think of. I mean, if you look at the Woodstock movie, let's say, the movie Woodstock, and you see Canned Heat, which is one of my favorites in 1969.
Me too, man.
Oh, I love Canned Heat, don't you? It's great stuff. Well, they played the Dome about a week or 8 days before they were in front of 400,000 people at Woodstock. They played the Dome. And I saw a list of all these concerts that happened there, a comprehensive list, and I thought, wow, gosh, what it would have been like to just to be at Humble Pie in 1972.
I mean,
Stevie Marriott, come on.
Oh gosh, with those Marshalls turned up, it must have been, but everybody, there was a really big consensus as far as the sound in that place was not good. I mean, everybody from Barry to my friend Teddy Dean to everybody is like, the sound in there was not good. But I was like, some of the acts that graced that stage, incredible.
But that was always the case back in those days. Well, I tell you what, we're running out of time, but I want to thank you so much for coming on. Now, real quick, what's next for you? What's next for you? What are you working on now?
I have been tossing around ideas. I'll be real quick. One person I have a sort of a little bit of fascination with is the one radio announcer, the Bull.
Yes, Henry Del Toro. Yes.
Thank you so much for filling that in that blank. Yes, the great, April Fool's Day surprise in 1901. He was a very interesting person, fascinating person to me.
Did you know him?
No, I did not. No, but from what I've heard, read, and just looked into, I was like, wow, this guy's really interesting. He really had that shock jock, even before, just, playing recordings to people, pranking them and all this stuff.
He was incredibly talented and incredibly gutsy. And man, he made so many records, like the one about Atlantic Avenue. I remember one time there was a problem with the mayor over in Portsmouth, got a letter, and he wrote this thing. The mayor wrote me a letter. He was hysterical. He was very talented. That's a good idea, man. That's a good idea to do one about him. That would be.
I thought about it. Yeah. I was like, if somebody's wild and has a great story, story. It was definitely Henry the Bull. I keep hearing about him. Oh, the Bull, he was great, and everybody, especially people from 24 to 36 years old that were that old back then, oh, I loved them. I listened to them every day. And so maybe I'll go that route, but there's a lot of...
We'll see. Well, let us know. I will promote it for you right here. And after all is said and done, he was a real nice guy too. He was a nice person. He was a first-rate person. Yes, he was. And he died too young. Paul, I want to thank you so much. We're going to promote the video. You go see it, and we're going to tell everybody all about it. And I thank you so much for coming on, and thank you for doing it, because I really did enjoy it, and I think a lot of people here in Southeastern Virginia did enjoy it. Thank you, sir.
I am glad to hear that. Thank you so much, Tony.
A pleasure. Thank you very much, Paul Unger, director of the Virginia Beach Dome documentary. Now, we mentioned our good friend Barry, who's been a guest on the show. We might have to get Gary, but let's get Barry in here. Yeah, let's get Barry, do an hour with Barry, and we'll just talk about memories and have people just calling up about concerts they show at the Dome and stuff like that. I think we'd have a lot of fun with that. Okay? I think that would be great. I think Barry would be willing to do that. Birdland Music, CDs, vinyl, tape, owned by the Friedman family since, is that 1869? Oh, 1969. 951 Providence Road, Virginia Beach. Vinyl is so popular now. You got that full sound. People love it.